project, department, and employee. And I want you to see each one of them has a diamond because it signifies there's a relationship. So instead of having that one diamond, sometimes you do see that it's just a generalized diamond. You can have it this way as well. So a project, one project can have many employees working on it. Of course, that would be how your situation is. Many employees can work for many departments, as one department can have many projects. Because it involves three tables and they all have a relationship with one another. That's the key here. They all have a relationship with one another. Then this is why it's called a ternary relationship. A binary relationship is when you get rid of one of those tables. Then it becomes a binary relationship. But we're looking at ternary, meaning that there's three tables, 1, 2, and 3, and they all have a relationship with one another in some way, shape, or form. Again, I'm going to say it again. A project, one project can have many employees working on that project, which is the reality of the subject. That's what it is. A project can have, it belong to many departments. A department can have many projects, as many departments can have many employees, and or many employees can work for, well, many employees with, many departments can have many employees. So because of the three tables and they all have a relationship with one another, regardless if it's one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, because this structure is happening, that it is a triangle of relationships, it is called a ternary relationship. These three tables, all three tables have a relationship with one another. The relationship type could be different, but the point is that they all, at one point or another, have a relationship with one another. One department can have many projects. That's a relationship. Many departments can have many employees. That's another relationship. One project can have many employees, could have a lot of employees working in that project, as one project could belong to many departments, of course, with the project being broken down to certain parts, bringing it together to that project. So because you work for IT doesn't mean that all you do is IT. You could be interacting with all departments. And depending on your position, you could be assisting them finishing the project, and then you might even leave your department, your IT department, and work for the engineering department, the cloud department. So in Google, that works that way, that you start in IT, and then you start looking at other departments that you might want to work for. So that way, when your grace period is up, if you're in a particular program called the Google 26-month program, you have to find a department you want to work for, and a project you want to work for. And if you indeed, it goes based off, sorry to say this, goes based off who likes you, really. I went to Google, and a couple friends of mine used to work for Google. It's a very frat type of environment when it comes to these projects sometimes. I'm not going to say every single department is the same way, but from the people that I know that work for Google, it's a very frattish, sorority type environment, that if you don't get along with everyone in the team and you don't fall in the good graces for everyone in the team and they don't all like you, then they might not want you in their team. And so you gotta be extremely charismatic from day one till the end. And they gotta like you from the beginning. That's kind of the way it works with Google in that sense. Another example for ternary relationship, for example, myself here included, a professor, of course, I give grades and I teach a particular subject. So a professor can give many students a grade. That's going to happen for me in about 3 days. And a particular professor like myself can also teach many subjects, as many subjects could be taught by a particular professor. For example, myself, I'm going to be giving you guys a grade. Most likely you'll see your grades on Friday for this course. You'll most likely, pretty sure it'll be Friday. You'll see your final exam grade, and I usually, when I finish posting that, I give the final posted on CUNY First on the same time. So basically, I already got your grades calculated. You just gotta wait for that one part. So myself, Professor Gonzalez, can give many students a grade. As myself, I could teach many subjects in the CIS department. As many subjects have been taught by myself. I've taught 212 for 3 years. And I had both sections at one point. And same thing. Many students could take a particular professor, as many subjects could be taught by a particular professor. And many students could take many subjects in the school. Hence the ternary relationship, 3 tables. And of course, it becomes 1 because I'm the professor and I am the one that gives you a grade. You don't have 2 professors giving you a grade. It's usually 1 professor that gives a grade, regardless of who is working under them. They are the ones that give the final say on the grade that you get. So, hence the ternary 3 tables, relationships, and the diamond that you see. Usually this is the one you see, but sometimes you do see it this way, so be advised on that. You need to know the definition. Definition is a ternary relationship is when 3 tables have a relationship with one another. That is indeed a ternary relationship. We look at another one, the recursive relationship. We've discussed this a couple of times, but just to be clear, sometimes husband and wife pairs. You might meet your girlfriend in the job. You might get married to your girlfriend, or married to your boyfriend, or married to someone. And usually, even though I'm not very, I would say this is okay, an employee, man or woman or whatever, woman, man, an employee, a wife, is married to, or could be single, but of course, an employee is married to her husband. If they both work in the same place, then they're both employees to the company. As a husband is married to his wife, and of course, the wife could also work for the company, and since they both work for the company, they're both employees. It doesn't change anything based off if they're married or not. It just says that at the end of the day, if the wife is married to her husband, or the husband is married to his wife, and they both work for the same company, there's nothing changes between the husband and wife. There's no additional attributes because you're married to this person or you're not married to this person. It means that at the end of the day, whether you met your husband at work or you ended up that you guys work for the same place and you're husband and wife, you're both employees to a particular business at the end of the day. So recursive relationship is that no matter what kind of relationship you have, husband, wife, student, tutor, it doesn't matter as long as they both at the end of the day are the same, have the same attributes. They just have a relationship with one another. So if it's let's say with students, a student could be a tutor, as a tutor could also be a student. It's the same thing. It doesn't change anything. It just says that you can be either one of the 2 positions. At the end of the day, you're still a student in the school. It's just that maybe your job title is a little different, but it doesn't change any of the attributes you have.
Professor,
yeah.
So you could basically say that a recursive relationship is like an alias.
No, because an alias is
like let's say like you're an employee and but you could also be a manager. So basically that employee is aliased as a manager.
No, that's not an alias. An alias means you change the name of the table.
Okay.
An alias, when you alias something, is that, for example, if you go under an alias, it means that your original name was changed to another name. That's what an alias is. Like there's aliases for tables, but the alias, the definition of alias is the same for everything. It's that you're changing the current name to a new name. But it doesn't, you can't say it's aliasing because you're not changing the name of it. So you're not changing employee to another and giving the table a new name. You're not doing that. A recursive relationship is that you have different titles, like job titles are different. Like a manager or supervisor. If they have the same attributes, a manager could supervise supervisor. A supervisor can have many managers, or could be managed by many managers. You're not changing the table name, you're changing the relationship they have with one another based on the title that we're given. But you're not changing the table name nor the relationship type. It doesn't change the one to many, many to many. It doesn't change anything. It's just saying that this title of wife or this title of husband, this came about because at the end of the day, whether she married you yesterday or you married her today, the title when you see each other is that you're husband and wife, but at the end of the day, you're still employees. It doesn't change any, it doesn't add any additional attributes because you got married.
Right. So it's basically a job title that falls under the same table.
Yeah. And it's just that you have a relationship with one another because of that job title.
Okay.
Any questions on recursive, ternary? Because when you're doing database design, you have to think about this, ternary. You have to think about, are there recursive relationships? And jumping into one more, weak relationships. When we look at weak relationships, I'm going to bring up the thing. Hold on. I had something I downloaded. I thought I opened it. Here we go. When we think about weak relationships, we have to think about when you have a weak table. Weak relationships or weak tables have a dual with one another. When we start weak tables, it means that that table cannot exist without the parent. We're looking at, if we remove, for example, customer and orders. So let's say we have a customer and order table. I'm going to go into the whiteboard for a moment. I'm going to go for the whiteboard one quick. It's loading quickly. Let's see. Go to whiteboard. Let me see if anybody else has came in. We have 13 out of 14. Hold on. Let me just add those people that came in. No, Winston is here. 1 second, just make sure everybody's accounted for. Yeah, I got that. Yep, that's it. I trick no show. Yeah, I expected that. All right. So now that we have this here, I have this whiteboard here. And when we start talking about weak relationships and weak tables, we start looking at, if we have these two tables, now you have the customer table. I'm going to say CUST. And I have another table. You have the diamond here, but I'm not going to completely close it because you're going to do another one. So I have this customer and I have this other table here. Now, mind you, there's no relationship just yet. So there's nothing yet here. Now, ask yourself the question, if you're on Amazon or you're on eBay or you're any of these little shops, any of these legit shops, let's go with that word, legitimate shops, wherever it is that you buy from, can an order exist without a customer? Ask yourself that question. If it can exist, which means, is that true that an order, this one right here, can exist if there's no customers?
No.
No, because of this here. Now, ask yourself another question. If there is a relationship, weak entity says it cannot have its own primary key. So if I have order details, let's go with another one here. By the way, there is a relationship there. I'll go with this one here. Now this is the one that you're going to have to ask yourself this question. The only way it becomes a weak entity is if there is no personal primary key. Now, the order details is dependent. It only gives you details of an order if and only if an order was placed. Now, can the order details table exist without the order? Remember, an order details gives you the details, the breakdown of everything that's happened with that order, as
No.
in quantity, stuff like that. No. Does an order details, do you think it should have its own primary key?
No.
No. Therefore, because it does not have its own primary key, here's the thing. If it does not have its own primary key, which means it only has a bunch of foreign keys, then this becomes a weak table. Everybody with me with that? Because it's a weak table, it has to have a weak relationship. So a weak entity is an entity that cannot exist without its parent, and it does not have its own primary keys. So which means if this doesn't have a primary key and it only has the order table as a primary key, as a foreign key, so the order details cannot exist without the order details has no primary key, only foreign keys, then it is a weak entity with a weak relationship connected to the order. But because the order table has a primary key, it is not a weak table, but there is a weak relationship. Ooh, wait a minute. Part is that I can just do that. Everybody with me here?
Wait, why is there a weak relationship between customer and order?
Because the customer places an order, so its primary key is here, but if the customer is removed, there is no order. If the customer,
Oh, so it's the dependency on the first table.
yes, on the parent. But remember, orders has a primary key.
No, order and customer do have primary keys, yes. But the order depends on the customer if that customer orders or not.
Yes,
So that's why it's a weak relationship.
is a weak relationship because it's dependent on this existence. But order details is not a regular entity because it's fully dependent on the order. So this order details has no primary keys at all. If there is no primary key, and all it has is a bunch of foreign keys, which means that eventually it's going to be a bridge table for something else, then because of that, it is a weak entity and has a weak relationship associated too. Because if you remove the order table, guess who leaves automatically? Order details is dropped. Everybody see what happened here? If I remove the orders table, the customer still exists. But if I remove the orders table, customer still exists, but not the order details, because the order details is a weak entity. Because it's a weak entity, it is fully dependent on the existence of its parent, which is the orders table. So a weak entity is an entity that's fully dependent on the existence of the parent and does not exist if the parent does not exist either. Any questions on this? So we're looking at this one here as weak relationship, which means that if this is dropped, if no one places an order, there's no customers, there is no orders. Or if someone decides to delete their order, or they don't want it anymore, it takes time to remove the order.
Hey, Professor, did I miss something? Why do all of why the, these are identifying relationships? Why? Why is not regular relationships?
Because the order details does not exist without the orders table. So it's fully dependent on the parent. So it has to be identified. Because the order details cannot exist. So if I remove the orders table, let's say I remove this one. I'm going to put an X on it because I don't want to redraw it again. So let's say this is removed, right? This is no longer there. What do you think happens to the order details table because the orders table has been removed?
The order details won't be any.
Yeah, because its parent is the orders table, and it's
Uh-huh.
dependent. You sometimes hear fully dependent. Fully dependent means that without the parent, any tables and again this means that there's no doesn't have its own primary keys. Because if it has its own primary keys, it's still an entity. It's just how we call it what the name of it, but another way of saying it is abandoned.
So all weak entities have to have an identifying relationship, the double triangle, the double diamond.
Yes, because it's saying that it's dependent on the parent. Because
Now, my question to you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Proceed.
this is a weak relationship, but it's an identifying relationship because it's identified only by the orders table. Non-identifying means that it could live on its own without it. Yes.
Okay, so what I was gonna ask you was, so the order table is not a weak entity, right?
No.
Because it has a primary key.
It has its own primary key.
Okay, but the order detail doesn't, due to the fact that it only carries foreign keys.
Only carries foreign keys, and it does not have its own primary key. So it can have other attributes. So it can have other
Right.
attributes, but it's not. None of those attributes are primary keys.
So a weak entity is dependent on its parent table and has no primary key of its own.
No, it does not. It does not happen.
Okay.
So that's when we look about that. So we're looking at, if we look at the review sheet, let me put the bring it back. Let me share my screen again. So if you have this here, I'm just gonna share my screen back so we get the review sheet back. We won't need this anymore. So we won't need this anymore. So so far, I'm pretty sure you guys know what a one-to-one relationship is, a one-to-many, many-to-many. I mean, this is 244 stuff, or even if you weren't 244, you came from another school, they should have covered this here. If not, you can go in the slides. The RAMP attribute is basically an attribute that does not exist, that you need two or more attributes to get another attribute from it. So, example, age. How do you know someone's age is based off the current, today's date, minus the date they were born. Based off that, the age is derived from current date minus the birth date. That will give you age, and that is the derived attribute because it derives from two or more columns that will make that column come out. So you need at least two. That's what it's called. Derived is derived of two or more attributes combined will provide you this derived attribute, like age. An attribute, you know what an attribute is. So key attributes is primary keys. DML, DCL, DDL, I covered that already. We'll leave, we can do normalization now, then we'll jump into these down here. When we look at query normalization, we're looking at definitions of normalization, normal forms, not denormalization. I'm not putting that in the final. I finished writing the final last week. Didn't put that in. So I will cover those that you should know for normalization. Form, second, third, and 3.5 and F. So we'll cover those quickly. So when we start looking at normalization in itself, these slides you already have. Normalization is the process of decomposing a gigantic table, which you saw from the Excel spreadsheet I gave you, into smaller tables to eliminate duplicate data and avoid any abnormalities such as inserting, updating, or deleting. When we start looking at normal forms, on the other hand, it's a set of rules that you have to follow to test the table structure to make sure there is no abnormalities such as these three up here. So when we say free of problems, we're talking about free of problems when it comes to inserting, updating, or deleting data. If you have to follow those rules to make sure that none of these three occur throughout your normalization, the normal form process. We will not reach, you only have to know from 1 to 3.5 and F, which is first, second, third, and 3.5. You do not need to know what 4 nor 5 is. When you start looking at first normal form, you have to understand the rules of normal forms. So what is the rules for first normal form is what? Data can be broken down any further. It's called atomic. You can't have repeating groups. You saw from the Excel spreadsheet before. Each row is unique, has a unique name. You cannot have a table with the same name twice. And of course, you're gonna have to see or define or identify. Doesn't mean you have to put it down, but you have to at least identify what you think is gonna be the primary key. So if I go back up here, just opening see. I'm gonna bring this here. So based off normalization, first normal form says these two cannot have the same name. There should not be, for example, this is the normalization. This should be not, it shouldn't happen in first normal form. You cannot have one big name and not know what is the first or last name. Cannot have repeating groups, meaning the commas should not exist. It should be one row should have one value in it. The column should not have the same name, no repeating data. And of course, because of that, that we should identify, or should be able to identify that there is a primary key. If not, make one from the set you have. So here I didn't identify a primary key, but in the second one, when they worked to first normal form, I said, well, I'm going to say, being this an invoice table, well, the invoice number should be your primary key. That makes more sense. I broke the name to first and last name, and each row or each record in the invoice table has one value and one value only. That's when you know you're in first normal form. These names are not concatenated together. They're just two separate columns. You identified your primary key, and there's only one, each record has one value in it. So we are not confused to what should be in it. Looking at the item name, we know item name means that it's the item that the person purchased. Invoice number is the invoice number of the invoice. The invoice date is the date it was purchased. The amount is the amount, or you can say the invoice amount is the amount the customer spent. And it's broken down because now you know exactly how much each item is worth. That's first normal form. Second normal form, of course, we identify as the invoice number as the primary key. So second rule of thumb is that if you finish first normal form and you finish that, you go to second. You should already know that you're in first normal form, and it should be non-key attributes are functionally dependent on the primary key. In other words, when you go back to the Excel spreadsheet in your second normal form, we have the invoice table here, but in item name was not dependent on the primary key we established to be in the first place. We said invoice number was your primary key, but the item name is not dependent on the invoice number, which means that these two don't have to be together, because the item name can still exist. That's what it says, not dependent. It can still exist without the invoice number. It's just not fully dependent on it. And the only way, if they're not dependent on it, create a relationship between the two, because they were indeed together at one point. Hence, if the item name, we should create a table called item number. We define invoice number as the primary key, and we created a relationship between invoice and item, which is the invoice number. Going back here on the next one, third normal form, of course, you should be already in second normal form, and no transitive dependency exists. The only way that these two share a relationship is by the foreign key only, and if there are any other columns that could be that you could put together to have a table. In other words, third normal form, all columns reference data are not dependent on the primary key should be removed. So anything additional that we see, we remove it, and they only share a relationship only by using a foreign key. Remember, we saw that in the Excel spreadsheet, we had customer ID, first name and last name. We determined on third normal form that this too could have its own table. And the only way they should communicate with one another is through a foreign key. Here we go. Customer ID. We'd established that customer ID is indeed independent. It could be its own table. It could be a parent. And a customer ID, the only way they can have a relationship with one another is through its primary key and foreign key relationship. A customer can place many orders, and of course can have many invoices associated to that particular person. Hence, the foreign key, which you saw in red, and you guys have copies of this, is the only way the table should communicate with one another and nothing else. We broke the table down into 3. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. And the only way these 3 tables talk to one another is through the foreign keys. Hence, no transitive dependency, which means that they are completely separated and they communicate only through the foreign keys, which are what assist us in making relationships with tables. So a customer can have many invoices, as an invoice can have many items associated to that invoice. Many items can be associated to many invoices. 3.5 and F tells us, hey, if we are indeed in 3.5 and F, what we need to see is that there's no non-trivial dependencies. And that if there is, we need to break this down a little further. Can this table be better? Yes. Are there any columns, any tables that we weren't thinking of? Well, if we have an items table, well, obviously there has to be a supplier that supplies these items. So this is when we start calling it that bridge table, because we start thinking of, is there anything that's missing that can make this table better? And if so, bring it in. Well, we do know that for every item, there's a supplier. You don't make your own clothes. You don't make these items. Someone has to supply it to the store. And this person is making this clothes. The supplier sees the clothes. They buy it off of them at very cheap factory rates. And then they sell it to these companies for more money. And then they scale the price up again, sell it to you. So we have the supplier items table because they're suppliers. Of course, your invoice has to tell you who these suppliers are, but the items are also have suppliers as well. So this table here is what we call the bridge table because it says supplier item. So in 3.5 in F, it says, are there any columns, any additional information we might need that can help us make this table stronger? Are there anything that we're leaving out? What we're leaving out is that items don't make themselves, and most people do not sell their own stuff there without having some kind of assistance, which is a supplier. So this is a supplier table that we didn't think about. We have the item over here, and since suppliers are the ones that indeed buy these items and apply it to these companies, we have a supplier items table here, and they have a relationship through this table called supplier items. That is a bridge table that connects the supplier table with the items table. Therefore, this has a relationship, and now we're at 3.5 and F. Because we have an additional table, and that additional table contains information that we didn't take into account at third normal form, that we need to take into account because we have to make this store, which is indeed the normalization office gears. We have to make sure that this database is completely soundproof. So we got to think of every single column, every single table that we might need, and then connect them all together, indeed, by the foreign keys. That's 3.5 enough right here. It's an extension of third normal form, and it's called 3.5NF. It's a stronger version of 3NF that addresses abnormalities that could be found in 3NF, meaning that there are columns we're not thinking of. Things might be repetitive, and we create tables to address those abnormalities. And these tables usually contain in many ways, many to many's that are broken down to one to many relationships, because we cannot leave things in many to many, because if we leave things in many to many, we forget columns that we need. Therefore, 3.5 and F breaks those possible many to many relationships into several one to many relationships with a table in between. So when we saw this here, I'll do the whiteboard one more time to show you what I mean. What's going on in 3.5 and F once I get the whiteboard up and running is that at one point or another, I'm going to erase this here. I should have left that one. I should have left that one. This is happening. So let me do this better. Or just with third number form is, if this happens right here, and remember this, associative entities, associative here. And let's say this is product, so pro, okay? Everybody see this design here. We have an associative entity. Means there's a relationship here, and eventually this is what's breaking up the situation, is that this might be happening. So if this is happening in third normal form, what 3.5 and F is doing is, if this happens in third normal form, it might not, because sometimes it's already good as it is. But if and indeed this relationship here is happening, what you need to do is that you got to break this apart into two one to manys. So if this is your third normal form, so if this is third normal form for you, Amanda said I isn't here. If this is 3 enough as your